Benji.
Hey Pascal, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. How was your trip home?
Yeah, yeah, it was okay. The plane was running an hour late, and as time progressed, it was running 45 minutes late, and then half an hour late, and then 15 minutes late. I was like, oh, this guy's going fast. Um, by the time we got back to Heathrow, it was on time.
Wait, it was an hour late.
It was yeah, about two or 3 hours before my flight. It was reporting as an hour late. Um,
I see.
but he managed to
I
the
thought you
pilot
were
managed
an
to make up all
hour.
the
I
time.
thought you were an hour late when you took off. Like this would be like
That
impressive.
would be impressive,
That
yeah.
would be very impressive. Like that's in an hour flight, catching up an hour would be very impressive indeed.
We were in the air for 40 minutes in the end. It was that fast.
Nice. As a heads up, me and Michael will only be here for 30 minutes. We have to head off. But we were here 30 minutes ago already, and we checked out the situation, and Zoom was there already.
Yeah, we looked wrong at our calendar somehow. Extra prepared.
Yeah.
Nice.
I met Sabrina and Cheryl.
Um, Matt, have you seen the CLA issue that I think you've been
Yeah,
CC'd on?
oh, yeah. We'll have to, I'll move away from spinning a bit. Yes, I have, and it is essentially we can solve this. It's just that like he needs to make a PR, or Kevin, you just need to make a PR on another uh sub repo, I think. Um,
Okay,
you,
yeah, I'll try it. I figured I'd just join and
yeah,
be
Yeah.
you're covered
super.
under the CLA. Uh, Internally, like it's the same CLA for all the sub repos. It's just our internal automatic tooling or whatever is a little wonky and hard coded.
Yeah, I'll try it later today.
Well, I'm happy with allowing that to go ahead anyway. Because Matt's covered it, so that's fine. Awesome. All right, well, let's get started then. Hello everyone. Welcome to the what are we in now? June edition of the Golden Path Working Group. I can't believe we're almost halfway through the year already.
Oh no, why did
Um,
you say that?
say again.
Why did you say that?
I know, right? Um, We, by being here, we have all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, the code of conduct, and we are aware that the meetings are recorded, they're published to YouTube, and that we use large language models and AI models to summarize these meetings and put notes up for us. On the topic of notes, if anyone wants to help take notes, there is a live notes doc linked in the agenda. The AI does take notes, but they're not always the best notes. So if you want to contribute to that, that would be really helpful. We'll go through and do a quick introduction of attendees, which we'll do in the order that they are on the agenda. I've just noticed I've not added myself to the agenda. But nonetheless, I'll introduce myself first. Hello, everyone. My name is Benji. I'm from Graphar.
Jeanette is on her way. She poked her head in. She'll be here. And then Hi, I'm Matt from Meta.
Matt and Gerald from Apollo.
Pascal from Chili Cream.
Mike from Chili Cream.
Kevin from WhatsApp/Meta.
I'm Sabrina from Meta.
And I am just ever so quickly raising a pull request to add myself. I'll add myself to the top and then no one will ever know that I forgot to do that. Cool. Back to the agenda. So a quick review of the agenda. It looks like today we are primarily discussing strong and fetchable gaps, which is going to be Matt. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add to the agenda in particular? Okay, no worries. I imagine that there will be open discussion time at the end of the meeting because the Golden Path is still quite fluid. So I think a lot of it's still just coming out of discussion. So once we have covered that agenda topic, we'll just open it up for discussion. A quick reminder that there are grants available for key initiatives. So if that would help you with anything, please do consider applying. And with that, I'll pass over to Matt.
Cool. Yeah, basically, I am getting background is that we have a whole bunch of essentially implicit specifications, especially in Relay, especially internally. If you reverse engineered Relay, strong and fetchable are there. And people have already created servers that are not within Meta that depend on this specification that is currently underspecified. So the goal of these two gaps is basically to put out what exists in terms of identity. So we have the global object identification spec that exists in Relay. We are trying to eventually get that into just being a gap with a number. And then we also have the composite schema spec, which I think I talked with Michael maybe about pulling the identity components of that into a gap, which we should do. But then this is what I gave a talk about a few years ago, just how Meta has separated the concept of what the identity you use to store something in like a consistency store from the identity that you use to actually make a request to the service to get that object back. And we have cases where it is not always possible, just because something has an identity, that you can ask the service for that same thing back again.
Yeah, we also have this concept in the composite schema spec. There are, for instance, cache keys that you can use for caching, but not to refetch it. Or you have refetch keys to refetch something, but
yeah. And I will say I don't necessarily recommend that this specific gap, especially around, or that either of these specific gaps become like the golden path. I do think there are some aspects, for instance, having a single resolver for your cacheable identity and a single resolver for your fetchable identity, that by default should probably be the correct way of dealing with identity. I think like having multi-field keys is more complexity than most services probably need. We have never needed that because we can just create a resolver that does that aggregation for us. But I understand if you're like building a database first service, that having multi-keys can be helpful. Yeah, yeah, so that's the basic background. I don't know what I guess there's some logistical questions of like how do we want to evolve identity? Um, and how do we like for the golden path purpose, we probably want to have a specification for identity that takes the best of global object, the best of strong and fetchable, and the best of the composite schemas identity specification. But in as simple, like even this is, in my opinion, like the way we've done it is not necessarily the most ergonomic. For instance, I would probably, if I were doing it again, like not use the field name and instead like the field name argument on the directive and instead have the directive on the field for strong, like at strong for the type and then at like strong field for the field. But
Yeah. The one thing we should like, why I think it's a very important thing for GraphQL is at the moment the only identity concept we have is node. And I think the node field is terrible in many aspects.
yeah,
Also
we
from the implementation side and stuff. But so like I think there should be something in the golden path. I don't think it has to have all the complexities in there, but there should be a simple entity concept that you can say, if you do this, this is good for clients. Clients will understand you. They can cache with that, and they can refetch stuff.
yeah, I think that having a annotation, probably instead of having at fetchable field name with this automatically produced fetch underscore underscore, probably it would be good to have like on a root field saying at, which I think is closer to the composite schema, where on a root field you can say this root field can fetch this type with these using this key.
Shall I quickly, because like we have 50 minutes, but shall I quickly show what we have in the composite schema spec just as an input, and then we can. Okay, so in the composite schema specification, we call these things lookup and key. So lookup is basically just a field that is defined by this is a stable key to fetch. This is a argument that represents a stable key to fetch a product. So by default, it's if this is the ID argument, then on a product there is an ID argument ID field exposed. It's the simplest of cases. For the and yeah, you can have this also make the 1 second node stuff compatible, because you basically annotate node and then this translates, and node could also be a lookup for compatibility. We also have a directive which is called key. This is not on the field, but on the type level. The main reason for that is that you can have multiple keys, like composite keys. And the way we describe this thing here is that it's a selection set in essence. just that we leave the outer squiggles away. And you can have multiple keys.
It's a reduced selection set.
Yeah, it's a reduced selection set, right?
Yeah.
And you can have multiple keys per thing, and not all keys are resolvable. Like not all keys have a lookup. But when you define a key, it's basically this is a stable key that you could use in a cache.
How do you deal with inner abstract type strongness? Like if an abstract type has a key, but it is not stable across types.
So each implementation can have their own key. Or is that your question? Is your question how you could fetch them?
More like, so one of the specific reasons we have the meta field of strong ID underscore is explicitly because we have unions
Yeah.
which have both strong and weak types.
Yeah.
But whenever we get an instance of an object that is strong, we want to be able to keep consistent across that.
Yeah, so the composite schema spec has more complex stuff around this. You can have that. We basically have like this choice operator where we can say, okay, it's either ID or it could be this guy here. I don't know if this complexity should be in a general spec because like this is more like for a query planner to have decision trees. But essentially, we can, in the composite schema spec, we can deal with these. There's a whole specification around what you can actually do. Is also for requirements. You could, where is it? But like this is not what I would put in a specification of any thoughts.
Yeah.
There's also like we have a generic for this. I don't find it.
Well, it is in a specification.
Yeah, it's in the specification.
The composite schema specification, but it belongs there, right? You don't need this complexity for identity and lookup. But it's actually like I didn't have the time to read it because I've just seen strong and fetchable in the Golden Path today as I checked with the agenda. But when I skimmed it, it felt like this is pretty much, or it is very similar from a thing to what we have with that key and at lookup. So it definitely now we already have the luxury of having two ways that we have to choose from to see what's going in the Golden Path.
What I like about for me the simplest thing already valuable for clients is that you just can annotate proper fields as being a lookup or like the annotation name is not so much the important thing, could also be fetched, whatever. But that you basically say this field is the way that you can fetch something by a stable key instead of you have to implement this generic thing that has no semantics.
Yeah, I think for the Golden Path purpose, I think instead of fetchable, having a single argument lookup and maybe multi-lookup for like IDs, list of ID, so like for Golden Path, I think actually not allowing the product ID, category ID bit, but like, okay, that's an add-on that, because in the vast majority of cases, I think you don't need it. So, but this API, I would argue, is in fact more ergonomic than fetchable.
Yeah, it's like we talked a bit with the Apollo guys, and And like Martine's idea was also like this could transcend to the client and solve a lot of
Yeah, you
problems.
really, you really made a strong case there that this actually is very much information that should be shared with consumers because consumers of any sorts actually can make use of this information that this is the stable key and this is how you can fetch it. This could be a client, this could be a gateway, this could be anything in the end, right?
And if you need to change that stable key, you have to preserve the existing fetchable field and create a new root fetchable like query field for the new key. It's possible we would want like a directive on the argument, so on the ID argument of like at like actual field is something else,
Yeah.
just so that you can migrate.
This
But
is what the is about.
oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
So
Yeah.
basically, if you have a better name, I'm still open.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like
It
the
was
loop
like
directive.
We had the first evolution of is, and I'm still proud of this because that's I don't know whose idea it was, but it was so good. It
yeah. For, in the,
instead of field, it would just be a. So then it would read like is a ID. It would be so great. Right?
yeah, but it's basically the idea was like product ID is the field ID.
Yeah.
So, but we like I'm not hung up on names, but like the more uh on the semantics.
Mm. One thing in Fetchable, is it possible to have more than one strong um s- it wouldn't be possible to have more than one strong ID per type, right? Like you couldn't say that the
Uh,
person is identified by their workday ID, but also by their actual ID.
you cannot have multiple identities. Only one field can produce the identity because the purpose of this is like when we're writing to a store, what must we always request? And
Hmm.
so going back to strong, this is one area of strong that I'm actually not confident in, which is we explicitly list out the field name that is being used, but we've found for clients this causes difficulty with evolution because we deduplicate in our requests at compile time. Like if you say field name cache ID, then if we request strong ID underscore underscore, we don't request cache ID, but we have like when you are looking it up in the reader fragment, we say, oh, instead of looking up cache ID, go look up strong ID. But probably this was a minor mistake. Um, and it's unclear to me whether it would be better to just force a like globally unique response key or to have both the like locally unique and globally unique options. But
Do you already have the gap written for
yeah,
strong?
gap
Awesome.
50,
50?
54. It's in the agenda.
Okay. So because my time is running out, I will read it, and I probably after reading it, I pull the lookup in a similar way out so that we can look at them side by side.
Mhm.
A simplified version, right? Because we don't need nested fields, stuff like that we use for federation reasons, because like in
Yep.
federation, you sometimes have complex keys for whatever reason.
Right.
But I pull this a simplified version out, and then we have it side by side, and we could start picking ideas from each other to see what is good for a maybe golden path thingy.
Yeah, I agree.
So from the golden path point of view, we also need to figure out exactly what the reason that this is in the golden path is. So if we put, for example, normalized stores and caches, things like that, into the golden path, then obviously identification is the thing that's critical here. And I don't think that lookup is important for that, because obviously lookup is more of the fetch side of things than the identification side of things. It relates, but you can look something up by multiple things, whereas you would only identify it in a cache key terms by one value. So we still need a way of indicating that. There have been proposals in the past, and Matt's written a fantastic review of why like Dunder ID is potentially problematic. I think one of the key things that you want for something like a cacheable entity is to know that that entire type is always a cacheable entity. And fetching Dunder ID says that like one user might be cacheable and a different user might not be. And that's kind of a weird thing for a client to have to deal with. So I think that whatever we do there needs to identify it. And honestly, I think using an interface to do that, like a entity interface, is not unreasonable. And we already have the node interface for doing that. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to do that. Maybe not with the strict rule that it has to be called node, maybe not with the strict rule that it has to be an ID field, and definitely not with the strict rule that it needs to have a lookup field called node. That's a separate thing. So maybe it's a new version of the global object identification spec that specifically only relates to essentially building what that cache key is. And that may then also be used potentially in lookups, but that's a separate concern. When it comes to lookups, we have to think about what is it there for in the golden path. Obviously, for federation, it's got a very, very clear use case.
It's not for federation in my head. It's the simplest case if you have nested pagination and you want to move forward this nested page, then you need a refetch mechanism. That's in Relay. Without refetching, you're basically lost.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was about to say. So for federation, you need it anyway. And for GraphQL, the main motivation for this is going to be pagination. I think that's really the
That's
key,
the first
possibly.
thing. That's the first thing on the golden path that you will want to adopt that will require this idiom.
Exactly. So I think for that, we should come at it not from a fetchable point of view, but actually from a pagination point of view, and that should be what we focus around. That isn't to say that we should build it as part of the pagination part of the golden path, but that should be our like motivating thing.
Yeah, but just to throw it in there, it's not just pagination, right? It's anything where you expand on an entity where you are in your client and you need more on this. That you need the refetch
it's the
capabilities.
Like
right, like at async or at
That's what I was going to say. Like
yeah.
at async is another way of doing that avoids the need for like a fetchable ID. So yeah, in the current form of GraphQL, definitely those other things as well, but maybe at async is our preferred way of doing that. And one of the things in the golden path, I think, is going to be expanding GraphQL's capabilities as well, like with service with service capabilities and things like that. So absolutely, like we may use that in the short term, and it might be on the golden path for the short term for that, but later it might be that it's replaced with async, and that's okay. Like we can be quite fluid in that regard. But pagination, I think, is very much the motivating factor, and I don't think, Matt, that async helps you with the pagination there, does it? No.
No,
So
it's just a very similar pattern.
yeah. So I think we should definitely like that is like a long-term use case for this.
I have to drop.
Okay.
Michael.
Thanks, Michael. But yeah, I think that should be the motivating factor for it. I don't think it's going to change the form, and I think lookup looks fantastic, and I think that's what we should adopt. I also think it's reasonable to allow multiple parameter lookup for some of these things. But if we, from a golden path perspective, we want to make it as simple as possible. And in that case, I think that because we want to put the person on the greatest path to success, if we can make it so that their cache key and their fetch key are the same, that might simplify things for them. Matt, I know that you've got experience of where this falls down at Meta. So for a regular person, like a regular company, like adopting this, what is the problem going to be if they do that?
Yeah, so the problem comes up specifically. This is like the problem comes when you require something to be fetchable, and over time it is like you have an instance of it. It can even be the same type, because often you have a concrete type that is actually under the hood a merging of various sources. Once you have a source that you cannot reliably create, or that you don't own the backing of, the only way to make that fetchable is basically encoding the object in its key, which people you will end up eventually, it is a high probability that you will end up accidentally basically introducing this pattern, because it's it's like steps down that you are forced to take as you evolve. So if you have right from the get-go an escape hatch, you can avoid the situation where you ever introduce, or you can either avoid the situation, or when you hit it, quickly migrate out of it, where you have kilobyte or megabyte large keys in your key value store.
So if we pin this again back to the problem of pagination, I think from my memory of what you've discussed before, you're talking about things in, say, newsfeed, where you've got these kind of generated items in newsfeed. They're not the same as a regular post, which actually has an ID and is something that the user's created. It's a dynamically created thing that represents some kind of combination of concepts. Is that something that you would need to then look up to do pagination inside of? Do you have use cases for that?
So we require it to be able to be looked up so that we can do debugging on it. But if you have a client that always fetches the lookup key, even in non-dev environments, now you're pushing to production this you are forced to have this everywhere. Whereas if you can split and just be yeah, for the purpose of production, we only need the cache ID. This thing, when you hit this, we're never going to have a pagination that is rooted on this element in the response, so we don't worry about it. We don't need to fetch that fetchable key. Yeah.
Okay, so I think one of the interesting things that we can do there is for we need a key that you use to say this is cacheable. And then if you want to use this more powerful automatic pagination, then you can make that lookupable. But that doesn't mean that everything with a key has to be lookupable. So I think using the at lookup or similar for that still works. You only add the lookups that make sense for you. As someone wants to do pagination within a new thing, they can either do it more manually, where they have to build everything out themselves, or they can request that the backend devs make sure that there's an at lookup for that type as well.
The other thing is the cloud across abstract types lookup, which is basically the node resolver. you probably want to implement Node Resolver where the key for what you're supplying to Node has enough information in it that you can quickly use a switch statement or something, as opposed to like trying to resolve the key for this type, then the next type, then the next type, then right. Especially because doing that cascading waterfall style resolution will inevitably result in you accidentally resolving the node to a type that is not the one that you thought you were sending it. So I think there is immediate value even in the golden path for having interfaces be able to be looked up via a different identifier than the concrete object type. Because it gives schema developers and people, as they are iterating, and basically I do think of the golden path as like, here are the sharp edges that you are likely to hit, and here's the obvious escape route that we've already, like, if you're following the golden path, it's obvious how to escape out of it.
Yeah, a lot of the aim of the golden path is to make it so that you actually have to put effort in to go and find those sharp corners. But yeah, like guiding away from them when you hit them as well, I think is definitely valuable. It's one of the interesting things about schema design being part of the golden path, because it's not really, it doesn't fit like my definition of the golden path, which is essentially lay the default experience so that like you're guided away. Like schema design is something you still have to consciously do. But if you're designing a schema, you're effectively laying down the golden path for your consumers so that they don't hit the problems, so that, you know, they use connections or whatever makes sense, and then they get automatic pagination, which they wouldn't have done if you'd just given them lists, for example. So yeah. Cool.
Okay, I think we've discussed all I wanted to. Basically, the fact that Michael is going to pull out gap and that we'll keep iterating in the space is like, so we don't, the last 20 minutes, anybody else have any topic they want to dig into?
Maybe I'm going to ask some naive questions because I'm coming at this from the perspective from Apollo Client, which has no schema knowledge and no compiler to be able to compensate for the lack of schema knowledge, right? So, like talking about this identification, I think a lot in terms of caching. One of the things that we miss a lot, that we see a lot with our users, is somebody forgets an ID. Now you get what should be a normalized object, you know, kind of nested, and you get all sorts of problems with that. You get cache misses and things get overwritten, and, you know, fetches all over the place that you have no idea where it's coming from. So like the whole strong proposal or Dunder ID makes a lot of sense to me, just in terms of, you know, hey, this is something that now the client can compensate for, auto inject a field that we can rely on so that users don't have to remember to include ID. It just kind of gets put there for them. How does some of this other stuff kind of address this, I guess, like the whole lookup situation? Am I missing something here?
So I wonder whether a system, not a client, a system that has no schema knowledge can be golden path. One of the golden path things is going to be like leveraging the main capabilities of GraphQL, right? Which is type safety,
Right.
for example.
Right.
So your users, if they're building things that are type safe, they are going to have tooling that generates types for them. They're going to use like GraphQL CodeGen or whatever
Right.
that is generating types. And probably, I would say, part of the system, again, that would be doing this might be, for example, a lint tool that makes sure that the shape of your system conforms to what your requirements are. So for example, a lint tool could do enforcement that you're using the correct fragments pattern. But in this case, it could also be when I see an entity, I require that an ID field is selected. And I personally have been using that lint rule with Apollo Client for 7+ years at this point. Like anytime that a type that has an ID field has a selection set, the ID field must be present in that selection set. And it's like just a
Right.
manual lint rule that you must conform to. So I don't think it's necessary for Apollo Client itself to try and solve this problem invisibly. What would need to be the case is that the user experience means that the problem is solved. So already with Apollo Client, you've got like, here's how you set it up with TypeScript. And like another part of that would be, here's like some basic
Here's the tooling you
structure,
need with it.
basic tooling, exactly. Like you should be using these ESLint presets, like the rules of React that you would use with React, right?
Right.
There would be the rules of GraphQL that you use with, or the rules of Apollo Client that you use with Apollo Client. And so I think a lot of that can be solved outside of the client. And I think also
Yeah,
the
okay.
whole adding things like dynamically to a query is kind of problematic in general because it makes things like trusted documents more challenging to then implement, which I
Right.
think will also be part of the golden path. So I think thinking of it as a system where Apollo Client is part of that system rather than Apollo Client itself has to be
Yeah.
golden path compliant, I think is maybe the answer there. Maybe. Not necessarily. By all means, disagree.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna noodle on that because I think that's a lot of it is we see this all the time, and yet that lint rule has existed forever, which means it's A, not discoverable, and B, there's just lack of education around that, right? So if the answer is just we need more documentation to say here's the setup, then that makes sense. But I tend to obviously with the engineering hat on tend to think of it from the tool I work on most. But
Yeah, I do think the ideal for Golden Path, or the ideal state for Golden Path in my mind is like there is an incentive for tools and for clients like Apollo, for services like Hot Chocolate to have the default configuration that they like when you click get Apollo or get Relay or get whatever, that it like is set up with a configuration file that's just like, yeah, this is going to work Golden Path style. Like all the Golden Path pieces, we have an answer for each of them.
right.
And if you don't want to use TypeScript, like sure, you can go in the config and turn it off. If you don't want to use whatever, you can turn it off. But
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And one of the like I keep saying like for the service capabilities, I want you to be able to basically point like the Apollo CLI at an endpoint and say, I want to build a new project that talks to this endpoint. And it should be able to go there,
Yeah.
figure out all the capabilities of that endpoint, know whether it can turn on fragment arguments, know how trusted documents work, know like that it uses WebSockets for subscriptions or whatever, and then configure Apollo client in the right way. But also, why not also set up TypeScript, also set up CodeGen,
Yeah.
also
So have
set
all the
up
tooling around it.
so then Apollo client itself is just a library, right? It's just a thing that's part of it.
Right.
The system,
Yeah, it's a piece of
the
it.
Apollo CLI itself would be the golden path thing, potentially.
It's like the Create React app of the React ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense. Okay.
I guess we're good. Okay. I have like a handful of operational questions. So I see that we have this note stock that maybe hasn't been updated since March. I also see that maybe we're taking AI notes. Like, where do the notes for this working group meeting live currently? Also, sorry, I'm Jeanette from Meta because I wasn't here for the first 5 minutes for the YouTube. Yes.
Hey, Jeanette, welcome.
Oh,
So
Charles.
they should be under the notes folder. I'm just checking that they are actually there. Yes, they are. So all of the notes get filed into the notes folder. This is the same for all working groups. So wherever you find an agendas folder, next to agendas is notes. Same for all working groups. And then in there, if you see a file that says summary dash, that's AI notes. And if you see one that's just the year and the month, those are human notes. And often they will be next to each other. So for example, in February, we have both human notes and AI notes, and you want to reference both of them, probably. Often the human notes are literally like back in the day, they were like the whole thing. Sometimes now they're just like a few key paragraphs that someone thought was important and the AI might not capture well. So yeah, you wanna cross-reference the two of them. And these get synchronized in general, roughly the Thursday that follows a working group meeting. But sometimes if I'm traveling, it might be delayed.
Gotcha. Okay, nice. And then I guess so sorry if this is covered in any of those previous notes, but have we agreed on like what the like concrete output for Golden Path will be? So I saw in like earlier notes it said it's not necessarily a collection of gaps, it's not a spec, it's not best practices. I know Benji, we had spoken at one point and you mentioned you feel it's important, it's tied to sort of concrete tools we can offer to people, like implementations of these best practices. Like I guess like is getting something into the Golden Path, having it show up in the GraphQL like learn somewhere in the like tooling section, or like yeah, I guess like yeah, is there like one place where we're sort of putting Golden Path, or we're still figuring it out?
So at the moment, the Golden Path has a website, which is goldenpath.graphql.org. And on there, we've got all the different like practices and solutions and problems that we're trying to solve. But this is very much like work in progress. The aim for the Golden Path for this particular website in particular is to the target audience for that is mostly tool writers. So people who are writing like Apollo Client, who are writing Relay, who are writing Urkel, GraphQL Code Gen, all of these kind of things is generally the audience. There is also the audience now that is schema designers because they are effectively laying out the golden path for their consumers. But that's kind of a much broader audience. The original aim for the golden path was much narrower. I think it's right that schema design is in there, but it does have a slightly different like pull than everything else. It's less automated. So the aim is that someone can go onto the golden path and say, who am I? I am someone who is making a GraphQL client. I'm Jarrell and I'm making Apollo client. What are the things that my tooling should adhere to? What should the default experience be for my users? And that is the main aim of this. In particular, it's that, but also being like a shared place for documentation of what and why this is as well, right? So when a user for Apollo client goes, oh, this trusted documents thing is stupid. Like every time I want to do something, I just want to run a query and you're making me hash it and send it to another server and then pull it back down just so I can run the query. This is daft. Why am I doing this? And you want to be able to say, right, this is why. Not this is Apollo justifying it. This is the GraphQL community saying this is a well-recognized problem that we all agree on, and we've all agreed this is the best solution that we have right now to this problem, and you can send them there. But also, so like in addition to that, for things like depth limits, right, and other such things, these are kind of more fluid. Like we recognize that depth limits is a thing and is important, but also we recognize that there are vastly different shapes of schemas. There are vastly different shapes of problem sets. And for some use cases, like I know Andy from the GraphQL Java project has said that they have users where like 21, 24 levels deep is actually a thing that they need to support. Like those queries are legitimately that deep, and we can't limit depth tighter than that. Whereas for many projects, like 12 is plenty. And like list depth is another thing where in many cases, like list depth of 1 might be sufficient. Like you do a list and you never list another list inside of that, and that should be enough. But sometimes 3 or 4 may be reasonable. So again, it depends on your use case. So the golden path, I think, A says you should have depth limits. B says we recommend that you set the default for, say, a list depth limit to, and I'm just making these numbers up, 2, right? List depth 2 by default. But also, clients shouldn't assume that it's 2 necessarily, that they shouldn't assume that the server has set the depth limit to 2. The golden path should also be telling the client, hey, depth limit is a thing. To find out if your server implements it, look up the service capabilities, and it will be there, and it will say I use depth limits, and it will say my depth limit is 2 or 3 or 7 or whatever. And now, not only does that client know, but also like the ESLint tooling that you use alongside it can be like, oh, lint error, you've gone too deep in this request. You need to like refactor it, or you need to request that the server extends it. So what are the outputs was the question, and the answer is documentation of what these things are, agreement on what the configuration parameters should be called, like graphql.gap.73. Depth limit, or whatever we do for the depth limit, whether that be a gap, whether that be like a standard thing. It might be graphql.goldenpath.depth limit or something. We need to decide on that. There isn't any decision on that so far. So like standardizing that, shared configuration options that are known across the ecosystem, that like any tool can pick up and understand and know whether it's relevant to them or not.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think a lot of my question is basically like what is the like RFC concrete step? So like for example, Matt has a gap proposal. Like is the step like put up a gap maybe with a specific like format, get that approved, then maybe put up like a PR for the website edit, or yeah, I guess I'm thinking very just like operationally, like what are the steps you take to like, so for example, I'm interested in co-location. Like I'm curious if the first step is I should put up like a gap for it, or if like there's like a yeah, like what is the first step and like following steps?
That's, yeah, great question. It's not well established, like do whatever works. A gap is a really good solution to this, right? Because gaps are generally just useful anyway. Even if that gap doesn't end up being golden path, it still has value. It's still something that you can point people to. So in general, I would recommend that a gap or some other destination be the place that something like this is documented. We want to be able to, in future, for example, say, let's imagine that we did the golden path in 2015 and we made the node spec part of the golden path. We want to be able to say in 2026, actually, we've been doing this for 10 years and this isn't the best solution. We're going to remove that from the golden path. It's not golden path anymore. What's golden path now is this other alternative thing. But we don't want to delete the node spec, right? Because people are using that. So it generally makes sense for the specific like implementation instructions, the algorithms, etc., to be a gap or to be a separate specification somewhere. It doesn't have to be a gap. It doesn't, it can be wherever. I think gaps is a really good location for them. And I really do think that will be the key pairing. But it needs to be somewhere. And then the golden path can say, well, we recommend this particular practice. Here's the reason that we recommend it. And when it comes to implementation, go over here. Here is the instructions. So it's kind of like a shared thing. So gaps in general are not necessarily proposed to be golden path. So yeah, writing a gap first that describes what you're talking about is probably wise, and then raising a pull request, or alternatively, raise a pull request about the web page. I mean, this is how I started Golden Path, right? It's just basically I wrote a bunch of markdown files about various different problems and solutions and sort of pointed to a bunch of stuff that already exists. And these are not the best markdown files. By all means, send pull requests to improve them. But yeah, you might start by just saying, I think that this is a problem that needs solving, and like, let's work on this. I don't even know what the solution to this is yet. Like object identity, we need a page on this. We don't know which one it is. Maybe it's strong, maybe it's something else. But like, we need a page about it. Let's describe the problem. Let's explain why it's important. Let's talk about what the possible solutions are. And then maybe it will take a while to merge. Maybe we'll all agree and say, yeah, let's merge it straight away. I mean, the golden path is work in progress right now. So it's all very fluid. I think it will get a lot stricter once we go more official. But for now, just do whatever works for you. Like, yeah, and then bring it to the working group and discuss it.
Gotcha. Okay, so it sounds like there's not a super like formal RFC process, like TSC approval is not required currently. It may change in the future as like distribution of this like goes forward. So like breaking changes to Golden Path is not something that's like a concept currently. So basically just try things out and we're figuring it out. Probably start with a gap is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And I think we explicitly expect the golden path to change over time. In particular, we want to add enhancements to GraphQL that improve things, like maybe as at async, for example. And once we have that, suddenly the golden path is going to change around that. And that is desired. And it doesn't break anyone. Arguably, it might mean that, for example, just again picking on Apollo client because Jarrell's here, but it might be that like Apollo client version 16 was compliant with the 2026 version of the Golden Path, but for the 2027 version, you need to upgrade to Apollo 17, and it changes how this main thing works, or it changes the defaults for this thing, because something that was Golden Path before is not going to be something that is no longer supported going forward, right? It's just going to be not the default experience. The Golden Path isn't like a strict rule. It's just a general, like, here's what you should get by default.
I can say this is just a quick thought. This is really helpful. Like again, thinking from like a WhatsApp perspective, because it's defining some problems that are on the horizon that maybe you haven't encountered yet. And then that leads into architecture. So like if you're making big decisions, which we are, like do you go down this path? For instance, we use an Erlang backend currently for a portion of our requests. And do you keep investing in building that to match the latest specs? Or are you comfortable with like a limited behavior? And so even just understanding the problems articulated, because the spec gives you like, here's how things have to be. But Golden Path is giving you like, here's how things ought to be. And there's a gap in between those two that I think is helpful for planning and understanding like technology. And it also helps with like AI figuring out why things are the way they are, not just what the spec itself is. So.
Yeah, really good points. I just want to add to that like the Golden Path isn't necessarily how things ought to be. It's more how they should be by default until you know better. People shouldn't be judged for straying from the Golden Path. That's entirely reasonable to stray from the Golden Path. The Golden Path is just like, we think if you follow this, you'll have a reasonably good, this will be reasonably good for you. So for example, let's pick on batch execution. Batch execution helps to mean that you shouldn't face the n+1 issue out of the box. Like it's just going to mean that that's solved for you. You don't have to worry about data loaders. It's like thrown at you and you are forced to embrace it. But if you find out that actually execution time, your latency is increasing because you can't start executing any of these things until the previous layer of them are complete, and you actually want to start doing that on a slant, doing it optimistically as early as possible, then like straying from the Golden Path and doing traditional resolvers or traditional resolution is perfectly valid, and that's totally fine. It doesn't mean that you've done something bad or anything like that. It's just, it shouldn't be your default experience, but when you know better, by all means, stray in a different direction.
That makes sense.
Awesome. Well, we're at the end of our hour, and this seems like a comfortable time to leave it. So thank you very much for the discussion, everyone. And please do get filing your gaps, get sending your pull requests. It would be great to discuss some of this stuff. I think identity and caching, normalized caching in particular, are things that we should be discussing. One big question that I actually have for us as a group is, I know that we all use normalized caches, but should normalized caches themselves be part of the golden path? Because there are clients that do disagree and think that normalized caching is actually unnecessary. It's particularly heavy. It leads to a particular problem set and edge cases that if you just had non-normalized caches and request-based caching, you wouldn't face. You might have inconsistency in your rendering, but when you do a thing, the end result of that is just straightforward and just the result, and you build your state forward. So I'd love to hear arguments either way, and decide where we should position that. It might be that the golden path side of that is more like, if your client has normalized caching, these things should be the case. And if you're designing a schema, you should design it in this way so that if your client has normalized caching, it's easy to do. Or maybe it should be, yeah, we absolutely think that normalized caching is really critical to the way that GraphQL works. And if you're not doing normalized caching, you're missing out on key parts of it. So I'd love to hear your arguments either way. So some fun homework for you. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And
Thanks,
catch you
Benji.
next month.
Thanks much.